My name is Hans-Georg Maaßen. I am known in Germany as the former head of the German Domestic Intelligence Service, the German Office for the Protection of the Constitution, and I dared to contradict Angela Merkel on her refugee policy several times. I was a member of the CDU, the Christian Democratic Party, until January of this year. And then I decided to found a new conservative party with my political followers and friends, the Werteunion, the so-called Union of Values. It is a split from the CDU, and our belief is that we represent the traditional positions of the CDU, while Merkel turned the CDU into an eco-socialist party that wants to transform our society from liberal democracy into an authoritarian socialist or neo-socialist state in which people are to be dictated ideologically how they ought to live, speak, and raise their children. Today's CDU party leader Merz, a former BlackRock employee, has been continuing this left-wing course. We then founded the party in February, and we will be running in the state elections in the land of Brandenburg, Saxony, and Thuringia in September. We are convinced that the time has come for a new conservative force to replace the CDU in Germany. Dear friends, I arrived today in Brussels, and I had doubt until this morning whether the event could really take place after the Belgian police tried to stop our convention. What the police was doing against our event has a lot to do with the topic of this panel. As a young lawyer, I had completed my doctorate on international refugee law and the protection of human rights over 30 years ago. After that, I had given lectures on refugee law for many years at the university in Berlin and drafted legislation on asylum law and immigration law in the Federal Ministry of the Interior in Germany. If someone had told me 30 years ago that a political convention of conservative politicians, philosophers, and publicists who are critical to the left-wing governments in Europe is prevented by the police, I would have said that such a thing is only possible in dictatorships or totalitarian states in other parts of the world, not in Europe. People who are defamed and excluded in such states due to their political conviction, who lose their jobs because they belong to a wrong party, who are afraid to express their opinion openly because otherwise their house or car will be damaged by the Antifa, and people who do not find venues for political events because the organizers are afraid of the street mob or negative media coverage would undoubtedly receive political asylum with us. Without a doubt, they would have received asylum if that was exactly what happened in any state in the world. Now we learn that political persecution and human rights violations also exist here. But it happens not only in Belgium, but also in Germany, and I think with gradual gradations also in many Western countries. In Germany, you have recently been punished even if you pronounce biological facts that have been clear to everyone since the beginning of humanity. A man is a man and a woman is a woman. The state demands that we have to say that men who feel like women are women. Otherwise, penalties are imminent. Ladies and gentlemen, to demand from someone to say obvious nonsense is not only a maximum of total control over people, but a serious encroachment on human rights. More and more Germans are leaving Germany as they can no longer stand the absurd and unrealistic political decisions and political repression in our everyday life. In schools, where the children have already been brainwashed, not to mention in the media. I believe that the human rights situation in the states of the EU has deteriorated dramatically in recent years, especially as a result of the corona policy. We can no longer treat this just a mistake of the judiciary or the foul game of the political opponent. There are no mistakes, and it is not a foul game, but the opponent has arbitrarily changed the rules of the political game, and he finds enemies against us in the sense of the socialist ideology by means of political persecution and human rights violations. And you have to say that quite openly. Anyone who prevents Democrats from holding conventions, who excludes and defames people, is not a Democrat, but someone who commits political persecution and human rights violations. We should have the courage to say that clearly. Dear friends, Germany is the main target country of migrants in Europe. The vast majority of migrants invokes the right of asylum that we Europeans actually need to be protected from our governments. However, hardly any of the asylum seekers coming to Germany are politically persecuted. As a rule, they are not entitled to asylum because they come to Germany and Europe via other states where they actually could find protection if they needed the protection. The right of asylum does not grant the right to choose the most beautiful country in the world and to travel to Europe from the other end of the world and settle permanently here. This is not covered by the right of asylum. The right of asylum means temporary protection if and as long as someone is politically persecuted. And the right of asylum means protection in the nearest safe third country or in the safe regions of the country of origin. Family reunification is also not necessary as long as a foreigner is in the asylum procedure and if he or she is only temporarily in our country. All these conditions for granting asylum are not met when the reception of migrants is discussed at European or national level in Germany. It is concealed that these people are usually neither politically persecuted nor that their human rights are not threatened in the country of origin. It is also concealed that they come to us through many other countries which would also be obliged to protect refugees under the Geneva Refugee Convention, so that we do not have to accept these migrants at all. It is also concealed that refugees are usually not immigrants, but only enjoy a temporary stay as long as the persecution situation continues. Nevertheless, these people are smuggled to us. There are international smuggling organizations that are also supported by NGOs, which often cooperate with left-wing parties or governments. For the smuggling organization, it is a big business, because with no branch of organized crime you can earn so much money as with smuggling and human trafficking. You could end the influx of refugees to Europe and Germany within days, if you wanted it politically. For this, there's no need for asylum examination centers abroad, which are completely unsuitable and should only pretend that politicians want to act. You would have sent them back to North Africa. You would have to bring the so-called shipwrecked in the Mediterranean, not to Italy or Spain, but to Tunisia or Morocco, for example. You could put some of the smugglers behind bars for decades if you politically wanted it. I always say many things are easier than you think, but the politicians in Brussels, Berlin, and elsewhere in Europe do not want it. But they want the mass influx, the mass migration to Europe. These politicians are also not willing to deport illegal foreigners. They say that this is not possible for humanitarian reasons or because the countries of origin do not want to take their own nationals back. But this is not the fact. As I worked with the Ministry of the Interior in Germany, I had negotiated agreements on the repatriation of illegal foreigners with Vietnam and Algeria in the 1990s. And it works to deport these illegals if you exert the necessarily political pressure. For example, you would only have to use the sanctions instruments against the members of the government of the states that do not take back their own nationals. Then everything would go very quickly. Interestingly, such sanctions are willingly used right now against Russia because of the American and Ukraine interests. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, migration policy could be normalized very quickly in Europe in such a way that we can control and limit the influx of migrants. What is currently taking place is a million-fold settlement of foreigners who show little respect to our European cultures, bringing foreseeable consequences to our society, our culture, and our democracy. Unfortunately, we are not governed by the smartest and by the best politicians. But even stupid people should understand that this policy is not in the interest of the European peoples and that it must be stopped immediately. Nevertheless, the policy continues as if nothing had happened. This brings me to the central question. Why are these politicians doing all this? Why don't they stop it? If Merkel had been asked in 2015 at the height of the refugee crisis, at that time she would have answered innocently, like a school girl, that these poor people had to be helped. There was constant talk of humanity and about poor refugees. We see every day that the political left, and I also include the former communist and official of the East German state youth Angela Merkel, has only a tactical relationship with humanity and human rights when it comes to the exclusion of political opponents or the persecution of critics of corona policy. Of course, refugee protection was only a pretext and not a serious reason to settle millions of foreigners from foreign cultures with us. Today, in 2024, there's less and less talk of refugee protection. The foreigners are simply allowed into the country because the governments have the power to do so. They don't even justify this with refugee protection. Why are they doing this? One of the left-wing extremist sea rescuers, so-called sea rescuers and organizers of mass immigration across the Mediterranean, explained it a year ago. We have the power to do it, and we want there to be no more white bread in Europe in 50 to 100 years. White bread. By white bread, this man understands people with white or light skin color. I will come to my central point. This millionfold settlement for foreigners from foreign cultures cannot be justified humanitarianly. It is neither political stupidity nor just for big business. But it is an ideological project of the left-wing extremist political sect. It is a group in left-wing extremism that used to be marginal and was also regarded as outsiders by other left-wing extremists. This left-wing extremist, highly fanatical sect, which we call the anti-Germans in Germany, is also represented in many other European states and in the United States. Characteristic for the sect is a fanatical hatred of national cultures, of its own community and people, and the economic, technical, and cultural supremacy of the West. In Germany, this sect was the subject of processing by my former intelligence service for many years. It has managed to become dominant in all areas of left-wing extremism, linking itself to the American woke movement. Under the pretext of humanitarian refugee protection, it also succeeded in winning over large parts of the intellectual liberal bourgeoisie for her politics. They are highly ideological fanatics who dream of a different society, who dream of vanishing our society through mass immigration for the alleged crimes of the European in the past, and who ultimately do nothing but destabilize and destroy our European societies and thus play into the hands of the enemies of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. They claim the right to choose another state people. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I come to the end. What can be done against it? A lot. We should start by tearing the mask off the face of the supposed refugee helpers and the left-wing journalists and politicians, the people who claim humanity for themselves, and we should openly say to their faces, you are nothing but enemies of freedom and humanity. Thank you for your attention.